What if everything you've been told about Jesus was never true? For centuries, the Vatican has guarded its secrets, but hidden deep inside old archives are clues that suggest the story of Jesus may not be history at all, but myth. In this video, we reveal 10 shocking proofs that could change the way you see faith, power, and the Church forever. And number 10 is the one the Vatican never wants you to hear. For centuries, the Vatican has stood as the guardian of Christian truth. Its libraries, archives, and cathedrals hold some of the most important religious documents in the world. But behind those locked doors, critics say, lies a secret the Church doesn't want you to know. The possibility that Jesus Christ, the central figure of Christianity, may never have existed as the Church describes him. For mythicists, scholars, and skeptics who argue Jesus was a myth, the case is built not on faith, but on silence, parallels, and suspicious history. And today, we're diving into 10 proofs they claim show Jesus was only a myth. Some will call it blasphemy. Others will call it truth. But one thing is certain. By the end of this exploration, you'll never see the story of Jesus or the power of the Vatican the same way again. Number 1. No contemporary records of Jesus. If Jesus really performed miracles, drew huge crowds, and shook the Roman Empire, why didn't contemporary historians write about him? Roman writers like Seneca, Pliny the Elder, Philo of Alexandria never mention Jesus. The Jewish historian Josephus mentions him, but scholars argue those passages are later Christian forgeries. Even Roman records of crucifixions do not list his name. Mythicists argue the silence is deafening. For such a world-changing figure, the lack of contemporary evidence is suspicious. Believers respond, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But critics say, if Jesus really walked on water, surely someone outside his followers would have written it down. Number 2. Parallels with pagan gods. Mythicists claim Jesus' life mirrors earlier pagan myths. Horus of Egypt, born of a virgin, performed miracles, killed and resurrected. Mithras of Persia, celebrated on December 25th, associated with salvation. Dionysus of Greece turned water to wine. The similarities suggest to critics that Jesus was not unique, but part of a long tradition of dying and rising gods. Defenders say the parallels are exaggerated or misrepresented. Still, the resemblances fuel suspicion. Was Jesus just another myth adapted to Jewish culture? Number 3. Paul's silence about Jesus' life. The Apostle Paul wrote earlier than the Gospels, yet in his letters, Paul barely mentions details of Jesus' life. No virgin birth, no parables, no miracles. Instead, Paul emphasizes a spiritual Christ, a cosmic Savior revealed through visions, not a teacher from Nazareth. Mythicists argue Paul believed in a heavenly figure, not a recent historical man. Church defenders argue Paul assumed his readers already knew the details, but critics say maybe those details hadn't been invented yet. Number 4. The Gospels written too late. The earliest Gospel, Mark, was written around 70 CE, decades after Jesus supposedly died. Matthew, Luke, and John came even later. By then, eyewitnesses would have been gone. Myths and legends had time to grow. Different Gospels contradict each other on key details: birthplace, Bethlehem or Nazareth. Genealogy, two completely different lineages. Resurrection accounts differ widely. Mythicists argue the Gospels aren't history. They're theology, myth woven into narrative. Number 5. The Pagan Festival of December 25. Jesus' birthday is celebrated on December 25, but this was already a sacred date for Sol Invictus, the Roman sun god. Mythicists argue the Church simply replaced a pagan holiday with a Christian one, rebranding an old festival. For them, this is less about history and more about cultural marketing. The Vatican admits Jesus was almost certainly not born on December 25, yet the Church continues the tradition, reinforcing the myth. Number 6. Resurrection myths predate Christianity. Dying and rising gods were common before Christianity. Osiris of Egypt, Adonis of Greece, Attis of Phrygia, all symbolized seasonal cycles of death and rebirth. Mythicists argue Jesus' resurrection fits this mythological template, not historical fact. Believers counter, Jesus' resurrection is different. It happened in history, not symbol. But critics reply, history doesn't support it, only faith. Number 7. The Vatican's suppressed Gospels. In 1945, the Nag Hammadi texts were discovered, Gospels of Thomas, Mary Magdalene, Judas. These presented Jesus differently, less divine, more mystical, sometimes even contradictory. Why were they excluded? Mythicists claim the Church deliberately suppressed alternative versions of Jesus to control the narrative. The Vatican insists those Gospels were heretical, but the act of suppression itself suggests the Church was creating its own version of Christ, silencing others. Number 8. Biblical editing and forgeries. Scholars admit some passages of the Bible were later additions. The ending of Mark 16:9-20 is missing in earliest manuscripts. The story of the adulterous woman, "Let he who is without sin," appears centuries later. References to the Trinity in 1 John are later insertions. Mythicists argue this proves the Church constructed Jesus' story over time, editing texts to fit doctrine. Defenders admit editing happened, but say the core remains. Critics respond, when the core itself is uncertain, what remains? Number 9. Jesus as political tool of empire. After Emperor Constantine adopted Christianity, Jesus' image changed. From a radical Jewish preacher, he became a divine king used to legitimize empire. The Council of Nicaea in 325 CE established Jesus' divinity by vote. Mythicists argue this shows the Church created Christ as imperial propaganda. Believers counter, the Council only affirmed what Christians already believed. But skeptics ask, if it was already believed, why the need for a council? Number 10. Silence of archaeology. Despite decades of excavations, no direct archaeological evidence of Jesus has been found. No writings, no artifacts, no burial site. We have evidence of Pontius Pilate, Caiaphas, and other figures of the time, but not Jesus. Mythicists argue that's because he never existed as described. Believers reply, absence of artifacts doesn't erase historical existence. But for critics, the silence adds weight to the myth theory. Conclusion: myth or Messiah?
So here are the 10 proofs Vatican hides. No contemporary records, pagan parallels, Paul's silence, late Gospels, pagan festivals reused, resurrection myths, suppressed Gospels, biblical editing, imperial politics, and archaeological silence. And that's the real tension. Is Jesus the Son of God, or a story crafted for power?
If the Jesus we know today was shaped more by the Vatican than by history, does that make him a myth? Or does faith itself create a reality that transcends history? What do you think? Did the Church hide the truth or preserve it?